The morning my mother stepped off that moving truck wearing her Sunday earrings and a smile that said I've already redecorated, I had two pieces of paper waiting in a kitchen drawer that she didn't know existed. She walked up my porch steps like a woman arriving at a property she'd already mentally claimed. She let her hand trail along the railing, the way you do when you're thinking about what color you'd repaint it. She surveyed the mountains behind the farmhouse with a small, satisfied nod, the nod of a person confirming that a thing they were promised has been delivered. And I stood in the doorway holding a coffee mug, watching her, completely still. That stillness was new. She had no idea what it meant. She was about to find out. Let me take you back 36 hours. Because that's where this story really begins, not on a gravel driveway in upstate New York, but in a kitchen lit by one overhead light, on the first real evening I'd ever had to myself. My name is Simone Aldridge. I'm 37 years old, and until 8 months ago, I worked the intake unit at a pediatric psychiatric facility in Philadelphia. 11 years. I sat across from children in crisis every single day, kids who had swallowed things, kids who were so frightened of the world they'd gone completely silent, families in the worst hours of their lives waiting for someone to tell them it was going to be survivable. I held that space for 11 years. I was good at it. So good that I'd stopped noticing the cost. The week before I quit, a 12-year-old girl I'd worked with for 4 months was discharged. She was genuinely better. Her mother came to collect her, and the girl looked at me over her mother's shoulder and gave me the smallest wave, the kind that means thank you in a language she didn't have words for yet. I walked back to my desk. I sat down. And I realized I could not remember what I'd eaten that morning. Could not remember the drive-in. Could not remember whether I had returned my own mother's call from 2 days earlier. That was it. That was the thing. I had spent 11 years being completely present for other people's lives, and somewhere in the middle of it, I had stopped being present for mine. So I quit. No speech. I filled out one form, returned my lanyard to the woman at the front desk, and walked out into a Philadelphia parking garage at 6 in the morning without looking back. I had a plan and a number in my savings account, built one paycheck at a time, over more than a decade of working while forgetting to spend. I sold my apartment in South Philly, the one with the broken radiator I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years, and combined that sale with my savings, and I found it. A 1,912 farmhouse on 2 acres in the Catskills, outside a small town called Phoenicia, New York. 2 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen with original tin ceilings that a previous owner had painted pale sage, and mountains visible from every window. 3 hours from Philadelphia. 3 hours from everyone who had ever handed me their worst day and walked away lighter. The deed listed one name, mine, Simone Claire Aldridge. I need you to hold on to that, because in about 18 hours my mother was going to try to make everyone forget it. I'd driven up that morning with the last carload of boxes. By late afternoon, the move was done, and I was sitting on the porch steps watching the light go gold behind the ridge, and I thought something I hadn't thought in years. I am not waiting for anything right now. No one needed me to be steady while they fell apart. No pager, no crisis, just the pine smell, and the mountain, and the first real quiet I'd earned, by simply being still. I almost cried. Not sad crying. The other kind. And then the phone rang. You have to understand what kind of daughter I'd been, because it's the only thing that explains why my mother was so completely certain of herself. In my family, I was the one who handled things. When my brother Marcus lost his apartment at 26, I covered the deposit. When my parents' car died, I drove them to appointments for 2 full months. When my grandmother Evelyn got sick, I flew home 4 times in 1 year, taking unpaid leave twice, sleeping in a hospital recliner. Nobody asked me. That was the trick of it, no one ever asked. In my family, Simone will handle it was never a request. It was a weather forecast. My mother, Diane, said it the way other people say it might rain, and I showed up every time, because saying no felt like leaving a wound open. A crisis counselor's instincts don't like an open wound. They want to close it, stabilize it, make it survivable. That instinct served my patients well. It served my family even better. And it cost me more than I ever sat down to add up. I tell you this, not so you feel sorry for me. I tell you so you understand the math my mother was running in her head. She wasn't asking permission to move into my house. She had never once needed my permission for anything. She had spent 37 years watching me absorb whatever the family handed over. She had every reason to believe I'd absorbed this too. A farmhouse in the mountains. Of course Simone will handle it. That was the forecast. What she didn't account for was that I had finally moved somewhere with nothing to fix. And an empty calendar does something strange to a woman who has spent a decade in crisis mode. It gives her time to think. The screen said Mom. I answered soft and ready, the way I always did. She didn't say hello. She said, "We'll be there by noon tomorrow. Your father said everything's fine." I actually looked at the phone. I asked where she meant. "The farmhouse?" she said, with the patience of someone repeating something obvious. "Me and your father. Marcus is renting the truck." Something went very still inside me. Not panic, the opposite of panic. The thing that goes still right before a hard intake, when you can see something is seriously wrong but you don't know yet how wrong. I told her carefully that we hadn't discussed this, that no one had asked me, that this was my house. Her voice went flat and bright at the same time. The tone she uses when she has already decided and is mildly annoyed you're still talking. "Simone," she said. "Family takes care of family. If you have a problem with that, you can find somewhere else." Find somewhere else. About the house I'd paid for with 11 years of other people's crises. I didn't yell. Something practiced in me took over, and I told her I'd call her back. I sat down in my new kitchen, under those sage-painted tin ceilings I'd loved from a listing photo at 2 in the morning, and I made myself think, why a truck already rented? Why Marcus involved Marcus, who hadn't held a steady job in over a year? Why your father said everything's fine, when my father had never once made a decision that bold without my mother's hand moving his pen. None of it felt spontaneous. It felt like something that had been moving without me for a while. I called Marcus first. He answered too quickly, said my name before I said a word. "Simone, look, before you start." I didn't let him start. I asked about the truck. I could hear him deciding how much truth to give me. "Don't make this weird," he finally said. "Everyone already knows. It's been the plan for weeks." He said everyone like it was a fixed fact. Aunt Claudette, cousins Naomi and Bree, the Washingtons from church. He listed them like a grocery run, people who had been told something I never said and had been standing inside that story while I was 3 hours away, finally sleeping. And underneath his certainty, I heard something else. If Mom and Dad moved upstate, the basement in their house was his again. He had every reason to believe what he'd been told. I asked him when I had offered. "You offered," he said. Flat. Certain. Not a question. I told him I had to go. My phone lit up before I'd set it down. Aunt Claudette. My mother's younger sister, who has never once called me without being deployed. I answered. "There she is." Warm, delighted. "We are all just so proud of you, Simone. Stepping up like this, it's not easy. And it says everything about who you are." I asked her gently what she was proud of. "Taking your folks in," she said. "Lord knows it's a lot to carry, but family takes care of family, and you've always had the biggest heart. Family takes care of family," the exact words my mother had used. Passed down the line like a casserole dish. I asked when exactly I'd offered. She laughed a little, like I was being modest. "Your mother told us months ago," she said. "Said you two had it all worked out. Said it was your idea. Months ago. I'd closed on the farmhouse 4 weeks back. The deed was still in a folder on my counter." I asked her one more question, the kind of clarifying question I'd learned to ask families to figure out what they actually knew versus what they'd been told. "Did Mom say I offered? Or that she asked me?" A pause. "The first real one." "She said you offered," Claudette said slowly. "That's what she said." I thanked her. I told her I loved her. Both were true. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring and said my name the way a man says it when he's been dreading the call all day. The story came out in pieces, the sideways, ashamed way men of a certain generation talk about financial failure. A business partnership that dissolved badly. A loan that went wrong. A retirement account he'd stopped looking at because looking hurt. "Your mother handles the paperwork side," he said, in a voice that cracked. I sign where she points. I felt the anger rise and I let it pass through me. Not gone. Managed. "Dad, did Mom tell you I offered the farmhouse?" A long pause. "She said you two had worked it out." "We didn't," I said. The sound he made then was barely a sound at all, like a small light coming on in a room he'd kept dark for years. On purpose, we hung up. I went to the folder. I have to be honest about the moment that came first, because it's the moment most of you will recognize somewhere in your own body. After I put the phone down, the fixer in me came roaring back. They're broke, I thought. He's ashamed. She's terrified. You have a second bedroom. What kind of person says no to her own parents? I actually opened a text to my mother. I typed, "Okay. We need to set some rules, but okay." My thumb hovered over send. I sat with that message for a long time. That wasn't kindness. I know the difference now between kindness and reflex, and that was 37 years of muscle memory, trying to close a wound the fast way, the way that scars wrong and aches every winter afterward. Saying yes wouldn't have saved my parents. It would have rewarded a lie, taught my mother the campaign worked, and handed my brother an address he hadn't earned. It would have meant the first thing I ever owned alone became, within 24 hours, one more thing the family used and called it love. I deleted the text word by word. My hand was almost steady by the time the box was empty. Then I opened the folder and I read the deed. Grantee, Simone Claire Aldridge. One name, recorded with the county. Not and, not or, not the Aldridge family. Mine. I propped it against the backsplash, and I let that fact settle into me the way a correct diagnosis settles. Not relief, exactly, but the solid ground of knowing exactly where you stand. I found my attorney's card clipped inside. Miss Okafor had handled the closing. It was past 9 at night, but lawyers have email, and I had a long night ahead. I kept it short and factual the way I'd write a clinical handoff note. My parents intended to move into the property the following morning. They believed they had a right to. I needed to understand exactly where I stood. Did the law agree with them, or with the deed? She wrote back in 35 minutes. I read her response twice. The property was mine alone. Sole ownership, recorded. A verbal claim, no matter how many people had been told it, no matter how long the story had been circulating, transferred nothing. A promise made at a dinner table isn't a deed. She could, if it would help, put the essentials on her firm's letterhead, parcel number, recording date, confirmation of sole ownership, no other party's claim. Sometimes, she wrote, people who won't hear a daughter will hear a lawyer. I told her yes, please, and thank you. By 10:30, a PDF was sitting in my inbox. I printed it on the little printer in the spare room. I slid it into the folder behind the deed. 2 pages now. Quiet pages. The loudest things in the house. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are sitting with a knot in your stomach right now, the one that says if you hold the line, you become the villain. I felt that knot in a house I'd paid for with 11 years of my own labor. I sat under my sage tin ceilings and felt every inch of it. If you have ever been told that your boundary was a betrayal, stay with me, because this is where it turned. I unmuted the family group chat. 44 messages. I started at the top. 3 weeks earlier, my mother. Big news, Simone has finally decided to do right by her family. We'll be joining her at the farmhouse this fall. So grateful for my daughter. Below it, a cascade of hearts and praise hands from aunts and cousins. What a blessing. Family is everything. She always was the one you could count on. A week later, my mother again, a photo. My farmhouse. My porch. My tin ceiling visible through the window. Captioned, "Our new home in the mountains." She'd taken that photo from the listing I'd sent one person on the night I got the keys, my father, because I was proud, and she'd made it the family announcement. I kept scrolling. Messages about which room my parents would take. A message from Claudette asking whether there was room for Marcus just while he gets back on his feet. Bree, Aunt Diane and Uncle Gerald, you deserve this so much. And then near the bottom, the message that made the floor tilt under me. My cousin Naomi had posted a screenshot, a real estate listing. My parents' brick colonial in the suburb where I grew up, the one with my height penciled on the laundry room doorframe in my mother's handwriting, with one word stamped across the photo in red, under contract. Naomi's caption, "Big moves for the whole family. Onward and upward." I read it 3 times. They had already sold the house. Signed a contract. Set a closing date. They had cut the rope behind them and were standing at the edge of a cliff that was my front door, betting everything they owned that I would catch them. My mother hadn't asked me to share my home. She had told everyone I'd already given it, sold the only one they had, and left me exactly one acceptable answer. Yes, if I said no now, in the story she had built and distributed to 44 cheerful messages, I was not refusing a request. I was throwing my elderly, homeless parents onto the street out of spite. That was the headline the crowd had agreed on. For one more minute, the old fear had its hand on my throat. Then it let go. And it didn't come back. Because I finally understood the rules of the game I had been losing my whole life. My mother's only real weapon was the audience. The shame only worked because the crowd knew one version of the story and had never heard mine. She'd built her position in front of witnesses. But a crowd assembled to shame you is also a crowd that can hear the truth if the truth is told in the same room, at the same hour, with the documents on the table. She had gathered the jury herself. All I had to do was call them to the right part of the story. I called Aunt Claudette at 8 the next morning. Warm, easy, like I was calling to confirm a parking spot. I am so glad everyone is excited, I said. Mom and Dad are coming at noon, why don't you and Naomi and Bree come a little before? I'd love a real housewarming. I want everyone to see the place. She was delighted. She started planning what to bring. I told her noon and to come early if she could. She said she'd gather the cousins. When I hung up, I sat for a moment with the strangeness of it. I had just invited my mother's own witnesses to watch her story come apart. And they had thanked me for it, and were bringing a coffee cake. I made a fresh pot. I set out mugs more than I needed. I put the folder in the kitchen drawer, closed but not hidden. Then I went and sat on the porch in my wicker chair in the cool October air, and I waited for my family to arrive. I should tell you that I slept the night before. Deeply, without dreaming, with the window cracked so the mountain air came in. I woke up rested. That's how I knew, somewhere that counted. It was already over. The rest was just waiting for the room to figure it out. Claudette arrived at 11:40 with a foil-covered coffee cake, and the particular brightness of someone arriving for a happy ending. Naomi and Bree came behind her with a fruit basket, and the kind of warmth that belongs to people who believe they are witnessing something good. I poured coffee. I let them walk through the small rooms. They admired the tin ceilings, the wide plank floors, the view from the back window where the ridge was turning amber. Bree asked which room would be my parents'. I smiled and said the coffee was fresh. I did not lie to them. I want that on the record. I welcomed them into my house with my whole heart, because in about 15 minutes every single one of them was going to need to remember that I had been calm and kind, and had set out coffee without shaking. The contrast was going to matter. Claudette was mid-sentence about her garden when we all heard it. A heavy diesel engine downshifting on the mountain road. The long crunch of tires on my gravel lane. The white moving truck nosed into view first, too big for my little drive, riding high, stacked with everything my parents owned. My father's car followed behind it. I set down my mug. The passenger door of the truck opened first. My mother stepped out. She had dressed up pressed slacks, pearl earrings, her hair set. She stood in my gravel drive and looked at the farmhouse and the mountain behind it with a slow, measuring nod. The nod of a woman confirming that a property she'd claimed in her mind has finally caught up to her. My father got out of the sedan and studied his shoes, his hands, anything but the front door. He already knew. And Marcus dropped from the truck cab and hauled open the back panel to reveal it. Floor to ceiling, their entire lives in boxes. Labeled in my mother's handwriting: kitchen, linens, Gerald office, bedroom, the contents of a sold house, every piece of it riding on a yes I never gave. My mother started up the walk with her arms already opening, already performing the arrival. She was 4 steps from the porch when she saw it wasn't empty. Her stride broke. Half a step. The recalculation crossed her face quick, almost invisible, and then she fixed her smile back on and decided the audience was a bonus. More people to witness her triumph. She spread her arms wider and announced to the porch, to the ridge, to all of us. We made it. She walked into my living room like a woman giving a tour of her own property. Smaller than the pictures, she said, running a finger along my windowsill. But we'll make it work. She told my father the back bedroom had the better morning light, that's ours. She told Marcus the second room was his, until things sort themselves out. She told Claudette they'd been planning this for months. Isn't that right, Simone? And turned to me with the bright, expectant look she'd used my entire life, right before I agreed to something. I just looked at her. The quieter I stayed, the more she filled the room. She told Bree she was thinking of painting over the tin ceiling, something more modern. She planned Thanksgiving in my dining room. She gave away the rooms of my house one by one to an audience she fully trusted to keep nodding along. And the whole time, Claudette's smile got a little smaller. Naomi kept glancing at me, waiting for me to join in, to laugh and agree and become the daughter this story needed. I didn't. I stood by the kitchen drawer, still. The way I used to stand outside an intake room before the hardest conversations. Finally, my mother clapped her hands bright. Final. All right. Marcus, start with the kitchen boxes. Simone, honey, where do you want our things put first? The room turned to look at me. I set down my mug. Before anything moves, I said, I want to make sure everyone in this room has the same information, because I think there's been some confusion. My voice was easy, conversational. The voice I use when I need a frightened family to hear me clearly and not flinch away. My mother's expression went flat and bright. Simone, this is not the time. Mom. Gentle, firm. Tell everyone again the way you've been telling them. What exactly did I agree to? She blinked. We discussed it. You wanted us nearby. When did we discuss it? Months ago. I closed on this house 4 weeks ago. I moved in yesterday. What month were we discussing it? The silence that followed was the first one she had ever lost to me. I watched her eyes go to Claudette, checking the room, looking for the backup that had always been there. Claudette didn't fill it. You sent me the listing, my mother said, pivoting fast. You wanted to share it. I sent it to Dad, I said. One person. The evening I got the keys, because I was proud. I turned to my aunt, kept my voice warm because none of this was her fault. Claudette, when Mom told you I'd offered the house, did you ever once hear me say it myself? A long, honest pause. No, Claudette said slowly. No, I only ever heard it from your mother. I know, I said. I just need everyone clear that I never said it. Then I opened the kitchen drawer. I took out the manila folder and set it flat on the table where anyone in the room could see it. I opened it without hurrying. 2 pages. I turned them toward the room. This is the deed to this property. I laid my hand beside it, not on it. One name. Mine, not Mom and Dad's, not the family's. Mine, recorded with the county. I set the second page beside the first, and this is a letter from the attorney who handled my closing. Same information. This house is mine. No one else holds any claim to it. I looked at my mother and kept my voice as level as the ridge outside. A promise made at someone's dinner table isn't a deed. You can tell everyone I offered. You can believe it yourself. It doesn't move a single recorded word out of my name. For 1 full second, nobody in the room breathed. Then my mother exploded. After everything I gave you, she said, and her voice cracked into something high and raw that I hadn't heard before. After everything, you would put your own mother out on the street in front of her family. I raised you. I gave up everything. Her face had gone red and wet, the performance cracking all the way through to what was underneath it. We sold our house, Simone. We have nowhere to go. Is that what you want? To humiliate us? To throw us away like we mean nothing? She wanted me to match her. To get loud, to lose composure, to become the unstable, ungrateful daughter the story needed. I didn't. I stood there with my hands folded and let her storm break against the quiet. And the quieter I stayed, the louder and smaller she got, until the only person performing in that room was her, and the audience she'd gathered to shame me was watching her instead. When she finally stopped to breathe, I said, You didn't sell the house because of me. You sold it before you ever asked me. There's a difference, and everyone in this room can see it now. My mother stared at me, her chest still heaving, and then she asked the question directly, without architecture around it, without a crowd preloaded with her answer. The first real question she'd ever asked me. So what are we supposed to do now? The whole room waited, and I gave her back the only answer that fit. Her own words, returned in the same even tone they'd left her, the night before, on the phone. If you don't like it, I said, you can find somewhere else. The silence after that was total. Claudette set down her coffee cake like it had gotten heavy. Naomi was reading her phone. I could see her looking at the screenshot of the listing, running the dates. Bree was looking at the floor. Marcus had been standing in the doorway holding a box labeled kitchen in my mother's handwriting. He bent slowly and set it on the floor. He did not pick up another one. My father, who had not spoken in 30 minutes, was sitting in one of Claudette's folding chairs, with his hands hanging between his knees. And my mother looked around the room at every person she had recruited to witness her victory, and one by one, they looked away. The audience had heard the other side at last. In the same room, at the same hour. The weapon had gone off in her own hands. I would be lying to you if I described what came next as satisfaction. I promised you honesty and I'm keeping it. When my mother understood what had happened, the fury drained out of her all at once, and what was left underneath it was fear. Plain, human, naked fear, the kind I had spent 11 years recognizing across a clinical desk. She was 64 years old, the house was sold, the retirement was gone. And she had just been completely seen by every person whose respect she'd managed her entire life. For one moment, she didn't look like my adversary. She looked like a frightened woman who had made a terrible bet and was only now understanding what she'd lost. I felt for her. I want you to know that. The part of me that spent 11 years holding scared families while their worlds fell apart, that part ached for her, genuinely. And I still didn't move. Because here's the thing I had to learn, and I mean really learn, not just know the words for. You can feel every inch of someone's pain and still not let their pain become your address. You can be sorry someone is frightened without letting their fear become your responsibility. You can love a person and still not give them the thing that isn't theirs to take. Those are different things. It took me 37 years to be able to tell them apart. And sitting in that kitchen with the deed on the table and the room gone quiet, I finally could. They didn't move in. There was nothing left to argue once the documents were out and the crowd had heard both sides. The boxes went back on the truck. Their lives rode back down the mountain that afternoon and landed in a storage unit my mother could afford even less than her pride. Within the month, my parents found a 2-bedroom apartment near their old neighborhood. A modest, manageable place they could have chosen from the start, the kind that didn't require anyone's house but their own decisions. Marcus, with the basement no longer guaranteed, found work. Not ideal work. Work. The family group chat, the one that had carried 44 messages about my generosity, went very quiet for a while, and then slowly came back as something more honest. A place where, for the first time, my cousins asked me how I was, instead of telling me what I'd agreed to. I didn't cut my parents off. I know people expect that ending the clean break, the door shut forever. It wasn't like that. A few weeks after the farmhouse morning, I emailed my mother a list of senior apartment complexes in their county. 3 places, with phone numbers, within their budget. Not money, not my front door. A list. The help I was willing to give freely, on my terms, instead of the help that gets taken from you and called duty. She never thanked me for it. But my father called on a Tuesday evening a month later and talked about nothing in particular for 15 minutes. At the end, just before he hung up, he said, "I'm glad you kept your place, Simone." It was the closest he could come to saying the rest of it. I took it. I see my family now. On my terms, at my pace, with the truth finally sitting in the room instead of a story told behind my back. It's not the family I imagined as a girl. It's an honest one. And for the first time in my life, I can rest inside it. Here is what I want to leave you with, not as advice, because I'm not your therapist, but as the thing I had to learn the hard way. There is a difference between a family that loves you and a family that uses you. And the hardest truth is that those can be the same people at the same time. The thing I had to figure out in an intake room, on a porch in the Catskills, with a deed on a kitchen table, is that you can love someone and still not let them live inside the space you built for yourself. A home is not something owed because of a shared last name. It is something you build, and the people who truly love you, they knock, they ask, they wait for you to open the door. Ask yourself this. Is there a door in your life that you keep unlocked for people who walk through it and rearrange the furniture? You are allowed to change that. You are allowed to decide who holds a key. You don't need a reason that would satisfy everyone in a group chat. You just need to know that the name on the deed is yours. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think I made the right call. Drop a 2 if you think I was too hard on my mother. Drop a 3 if you've been standing at your own version of that front door, and you came across this video today because you needed to. I read every one. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? This channel reaches people from everywhere, and I genuinely love knowing that this story found you, wherever you landed. If any part of this felt familiar, if you have ever stood in something you built and been told you owe it to someone else, share your story in the comments below. You are in the right place. There are people here who will understand it. If this reached you today, share it with someone who needs it. There is a person in your life right now who has been handing themselves away piece by piece and calling it loyalty. Send this to them. Let it be the thing that says, you are allowed to keep what is yours. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe and stay, because every week we tell the stories of ordinary people who stopped disappearing and started holding the line. You belong here. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in New York's Hudson Valley to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.